Well, good morning, everybody. Good to see you. A couple of Wednesdays ago, we had a precepts recitation, and the Doan, Andrew, asked me about ringing bells when we say the three pure precepts. So I had to stop and think. The three pure precepts are I vow to live in enlightenment. I vow to practice non-injury. I vow to live for the benefit of all beings. And I was listening to what I hear or what I recall hearing when we recite those. And I didn't remember any bells. So I told Andrew, no bells when we recite the three pure precepts. But then I decided this is what I wanted to talk about today, the three pure precepts. And this is not in any way to preempt anything Steve is going to say when he talks about the three pure precepts, the 10 gray precepts, and the formless admission. I just decided this sort of independently. And I'm very much interested in hearing what you have to say about the three pure precepts. So let me just say that I know my remarks are going to be based on this book, Living by Vow by Shohaku Okamura. We studied this before the pandemic on Wednesday nights. It's a lovely text. And my comments, a number of my comments about the three pure precepts are based on what he says about the 10 grave precepts. But it doesn't matter. What he says is relevant and perfect, and not perfect, but very helpful. It was very helpful in preparing this talk. And let me just say that this has been, people talk about this. This has been, when we are up here, this has been a difficult week. It's not funny what happened, but first of all, we moved office buildings. So I work in downtown St. Paul, and we moved from a dump, basically, but that's not the fault of the building. It has to do with the fact that they couldn't wait to get rid of us, to another building called the Great Northern Building. And I'm learning my way around from the Skyway into the building. Everybody's on one floor. It's enormous. I'm walking around. I'm still using a walker for balance. It's an enormous space. I'm figuring it all out. And that's just the beginning. I didn't go to work on Monday because it wasn't clear that IT would have everything set up and ready for everybody when they came back to work. And so I waited till Tuesday. So I worked on the talk Monday and yesterday, and I make no promises because I also am guilty in the eyes of a person whom I've known for many years of saying precisely the wrong thing, precisely at the wrong time, and precisely in the wrong place. It is a terrible thing when one's spouse inexplicably, unpredictably, and without warning does away with oneself. And the question I asked was apparently so egregious, so poorly timed, and I had been instructed in a letter not to ask the question, but I hadn't opened the letter yet. And so I asked this question, and now I have been blackballed. I've been blocked. I've been told never to return for services. I've been told that if I tried to get the services from other people in this place, that they already had been told they were to have nothing to do with me. Now, this is a wonderful opportunity to practice. What comes to mind is the fourth grave precept. Self-nature is clear and obvious. Within the unutterable Dharma, not speaking a single word is the precept of not committing false speech. So this person has provided me with the perfect opportunity to practice the fourth precept of not uttering a single word. It's really a wonderful opportunity. Although I'm sorry I caused this person pain. It was inadvertent, but way too late for me to try to say anything about it. So what are the three pure precepts? I vow to live in enlightenment. I vow to practice non-injury. I vow to live for the benefit of all beings. Those are the three pure precepts. And when as I said, when we recite the precepts at the end of a practice period, we recite the formal submission, the three pure precepts, and the 10 grave precepts. So they were fresh in my mind. And I don't know why, but I just wanted to talk about the three pure precepts. Let me say something about the I. In the I vow to live in enlightenment. I vow to practice non-injury. I vow to live for the benefit of all beings. Understanding that this I is not the egocentric I. It's not the I of I, me, and you, or I and that, and over there, I here, you over there, it over there, whatever. It's an I. Well, to live in enlightenment is to understand what that I means. And I want to first start with what Norm says. Norm says about that, all beings are mutually assisting each other. We mistake what Norm calls mutual assistance for egocentric ideas we have about assistance. And then we can look out at a truly upsetting world and see everywhere that in fact people are not mutually assisting each other. They're killing each other. They seem to be doing their best to target others, to harm the planet, you name it. This is a conventional view of reality. What Norm is talking about is an understanding that comes out of the whole, out of understanding that without all beings, you, me, anything else would simply not show up. We would not show up. We need all other beings showing up as they show up, to show up as we show up. And this is known as total dynamic working. And I can't say really that I fully understand this, but I do have a sense that this is not an egocentric thing. To understand this is actually to live in enlightenment, to uphold the first pure precept of the vow to live in enlightenment. That is living in enlightenment, living out of the whole, living out of an understanding that without all these beings mutually supporting and assisting us, we simply would not show up. And again, I am not completely satisfied with what I just told you. I'm not sure that at all captures what Norm says, but I have an inkling of what he's talking about and what Steve talks about and what Steve talks about when they talk about acting out of the whole. I also wanted to point to something else Norm said a long time ago, and I've talked about this before. During one session a while back, maybe 10 years before the pandemic, I was in a session and Norm was giving the 9 o'clock talk. And Norm said, be the awakeness and awareness that you are. And I just wanted to stand up and cheer. I'd never heard it put that way. Be the awakeness and awareness that you are. That's a vow. To take that seriously right there is a vow to be the awakeness and awareness that you are. And this is what we practice. This is what we this is what we talk about here at Dharma Field. This is the practice that we engage in. This is what Zazen is about. Practicing being the awakeness and awareness that we are. This is our vow. And I have to say that when I wrote this talk, I'd been totally tossed away by this person's reaction to my saying precisely the wrong thing at the wrong time in the wrong place. I went to work on Tuesday when I returned to work to the new building, and when I thought maybe IT would be available to help me set up my computer, and they managed to get everybody else's going. He showed up on Monday. So I was sitting down in the lobby of this building, this great northern building, waiting for my supervisor to come help me find the office. I had no idea where it was. I'd been taken on a tour, but man, the whole thing was so baffling. And the director of the program I work for came down the elevator. This is before I'd been able to text my supervisor to let her know I was there. And he walks over to me and I burst into tears. And I said, I'm sorry, Frank. I really apologize. I said, I'm having a really bad day. And Frank looks at me with a great deal of compassion. And he says very quickly, I'm going to go run get Mila, who is my boss. I have a feeling he could not wait to get out of there, but that's fine. I get it. He'd never seen me burst into tears. The last time we talked, I told him a joke, a really bad joke, and he'd already heard it, but that's okay. He laughed anyway. So, that's when I prepared this talk. So this is Shohako Okamura's book, Living by Vow. I really like this book. He says, from the beginning, this is on page 15. He says, from the beginning, however, especially in Mahayana Buddhism, vow is essential for all bodhisattvas. By the way, we're all bodhisattvas. He says, in fact, part of the definition of a bodhisattva is a person who lives by vow instead of by karma. Very interesting. And as he says, karma means habit, preferences, or a ready-made system of values. As we speak of it here at Dharma Field, karma means willed action. This is acting out of leaning mind. This is a mind that is leaning either towards something based on habit, preferences, or a ready-made system of values, or a mind that's leaning away from that based on all of that. This is our human situation. This is the cause of suffering. This is what the Buddha taught as ignorance. We do this in ignorance. So we're leaning away based on our dislikes, our preferences, and this is fraught with what's called intention. Intention meaning bringing about something that is not, that is based on our own desires. There's nothing wrong with that as long as we understand what we are doing. As I think it's Suzuki says, or maybe it's Katagiri, we cannot live without desires. We cannot live without knowing when we're hungry and need to eat, knowing when we need to sleep. No, however it is our desires can lead us and guide us. We cannot live without them, but we can also be totally taken up with them and lose sight of the whole, of totality, of reality. He says, Okamura says, as we grow up, we learn a system of values from the culture around us, which we use to evaluate the world and choose actions. We all understand this. We all are aware of, to some extent, what it means in this culture to grow up Caucasian, to have certain opportunities that perhaps other people don't have. But again, this gets tricky. One has to be very careful what one says here. But we've had certain advantages that other people haven't had. And we all have a system. We all grow up with this system of values, maybe even religious values. We were raised in a particular religious tradition. I was raised a Catholic. And sort of like what happened with what I just described to you, saying precisely the wrong thing at the wrong time in the wrong place. I was afforded the opportunity of just leaving Catholicism when I was told by a priest at the age of 16, as he slammed the confessional door in my face, well, if you're not sorry about such and such, which I'm not going to go into, I had said point blank, I wasn't sorry. He said, then I can't give you absolution. And he slammed the confessional door in my face. Now, being given absolution is part of the whole process of going to confession. You say a ritualized little intro. It's been so long since my last confession. These are my sins. And then you say you're sorry for them. And then you say your sins. And then you're given absolution. So this was a great opportunity, having that confessional door slammed in my face. I could, without any regret, kiss Catholicism goodbye. That's not to say there aren't valuable things about it. It's not for me to say that. I can't say that. But for me at that time, at that place, it was a great release and in many ways a blessing. But, and it afforded me the opportunity to frame what I said. I knew that if I said I was not sorry, that was pretty much the end of the situation. So it actually gave me the words. In that respect, it was very generous. And I learned a system of morality. I'm not sure I can explain if I'm still practicing that, because I don't think I am, although there are overlaps in terms of not lying, not stealing. But precepts and commandments are two different things, and I'm sure you'll discuss the difference. In any case, those were some of that's part of what constituted the system of values that I grew up with, which is what he calls karma, living by karma. He says, in contrast, a bodhisattva lives by vows. A vow is like a magnet or compass. This is so interesting. That shows us the direction toward Buddha, toward the Buddha. He says there are two kinds of vows: general vows taken by all bodhisattvas, and particular vows for each person. He says, these vows provide our lives with a direction, and therefore we must live by these vows. So when we live by habits, preferences, desires, in order to obtain some ego-centered or egocentric end or fulfillment of some desire, we are living, loosely speaking, in a manner opposite of vow. He says, I don't know if this system of values that we learn from the culture around us, this is how we evaluate the world and choose actions. Like I said, as he said, vow is like a magnet or compass that shows us the direction toward Buddha. He says on page 24 that the Buddha's determination to start teaching was the origin of the vow in Buddhism. This is a very interesting story. The Buddha, as you know, left his home in order to understand what he was seeing in the forms of suffering, old age, sickness, death. He understood that he was not seeing the full picture. So he left his home, he left his wife, he left his son, he left the compound in which he'd been raised. He left behind the system of values in which he'd been raised in order to understand for himself the causes of suffering, of ignorance. And he sat in meditation. And he woke up while sitting. And Okamura says, he says a lot about this, but he says, Buddha remained sitting for several weeks to savor his enlightenment. I thought that was interesting. He said he was released from all ignorance and suffering, and he enjoyed it. He felt that what he now saw, the causes of suffering, was very difficult to understand. And he feared that if he tried to teach others what he had discovered, no one would understand. And he thought, the content of my enlightenment, the concept of interdependent origination, that all beings are mutually dependent on each other, that we do not live alone, that we do not live in separation, that we live in totality, in wholeness, that this is extremely difficult to understand. And he said, he thought to himself, those who enjoy clinging, take pleasure in attachment, and are fond of their ties of dependence, and they will never be able to understand it. So pondering in this way, he was disinclined to go out and teach what he had come to understand. And the story that Okamura tells, I'd never heard before. He says, in the Sanskrit story, Brahma Sahampati, a god, divined what the Buddha was thinking. And then Shohak says, perhaps this is not a description of real events, but an account of what was happening in the Buddha's mind. So take this lightly. He says, when he saw that the Buddha had decided not to teach, he asked him to reconsider. And he asked him 3 times. And on the 3rd time, the Buddha reconsidered and agreed to teach. And Okamura says something interesting. He says, the Buddha's hesitation to teach what he had learned is understandable. He says, when I first studied the Buddha's teaching, I had difficulty accepting it. He says, it's easy to understand as an abstract theory that the cause of suffering is ignorance and desire, or to see examples in other people, That's not so hard to understand. And we do this all the time. This is how we divide up reality. We see these examples in other people, but do we, as Dogen says, turn that light inward to illuminate ourselves? That's what part of what Dogen's talking about in the Fukan Zazengi. He says, but it's difficult to see when we ourselves suffer and are ignorant. It's also hard to accept that we are deluded. We believe, he says, that we are special, important, and valuable. That's why, one of the reasons why the opportunity to practice afforded to me by this situation I told you about, in which I had believed myself to some extent to be special, important, and valuable. I was a great tipper, for one thing. Completely swept away. Great opportunity. And great offering, really. Anyway, he says it's not a matter of intellectual understanding. It's not a set of abstract hypotheses. He says, if we agree with the Buddha's teaching, we need to practice it and make an effort to transform our lives. So anyway, as a result of this Brahma's request, the Buddha went to Benares and taught a group of ascetic monks who had practiced with him. And he found that they were receptive to his teachings. They did not reject his teachings. So this is, according to Okamura, the source of a vow, the bodhisattva vow that we make when we vow to practice, when we vow to live in enlightenment, when we vow to practice non-injury, when we vow to live for the benefit of all beings. By the way, I think these vows, the 3 of them are similar to the 12-fold chain of causation, in that if we pick up one of the links in the chain, we pick up the entire chain. And that's very difficult to explain. I'm not going to try to talk about that now, but I think if we take up the practice of one of these vows to live in enlightenment, we've already taken up the practice of all 3, to practice non-injury, to live in enlightenment, and to live for the benefit of all beings. And I also want to point out that there are other teachings, not just Mahayana teachings, that point to this, that point to living this way. And I'm thinking in particular of the 183rd verse of the Dhammapada, which says to practice what is wholesome, to avoid what is wholesome. To avoid, thank you, to practice what is wholesome, thank you, to avoid what is unwholesome, and to purify your own mind. So to practice what is wholesome is to understand our propensity to act out of desire, to act out of a ready-made system of values, and just to see that when it shows up and to let that go. That is to both purify one's own mind and to practice what is wholesome, to practice out of a realization that we are not alone, that our actions have consequences on how other people are trying to live. And so that's practicing what is wholesome, avoiding what is unwholesome, avoiding what is not, of doing what is not coming out of an understanding of wholeness and totality. There's a lot to be said about that, and I'm sure we'll get to that because at some point we're going to take up again reading the Dhammapada. But then there's the third aspect of the 183rd verse, which is to purify your own mind. And this purifying your own mind is this turning your light inward and noticing what's showing up, noticing desire, noticing wanting to push things away based on preference or pull it toward us based on pushing away based on dislike, pulling toward us based on preferences, and just letting that go. Just letting that go. We don't have to do anything with that other than just let it go. In fact, to do anything other than letting go of it, just to let go of it, is to not be acting out of the whole. Acting out of the whole is just allowing it to be and allowing it to drop away. So I wrote this so many times. Well, never mind. He also says, which I found very interesting, I like this a lot. He says, a bodhisattva is a disciple or a child of the Buddha. A person who aspires to learn the Buddha's teaching and follow his example. Vow is essential for us as Buddhist practitioners. He says it is a concrete form, a concrete and practical form of wisdom and compassion. He says this is an important point to understand when we think about vow. There are many ways that we try to practice compassion, and I've made many mistakes in attempts to practice compassion. For example, in attempts to practice compassion, I've given away money to charity. Let me tell you, that's not necessarily the way to go, because then you get put on a list that's sold to other people, and then you get besieged by requests for money from other charities. So that has its limitations. That's not really what we mean by compassion. This compassion and this wisdom are imply no thought of attainment. We're not looking to get anything as a result of practicing wisdom and compassion, because there's an understanding that really there's nothing in particular to get. Nothing in particular. And that giving, the perfection of giving, is an understanding that there is no giver, no one in particular who gives. B, there is nothing in particular that's given. And C, I forget what C is. Giver, the gift itself is empty. Is that C? The perfection of giving. Do I have them reversed? Okay. There's no giver, there's no gift, and there's nothing to receive. Or there's no giver, there's nothing to receive, there's no gift. This is empty. This is give. That's how we actually can give. The perfection, that's the perfection of giving. And I needed to look that up before I brought that up, but I didn't. But anyway, it's an understanding of the emptiness. So that we can't really get anything back when we give. And it's an understanding that there's wisdom and there's, in a Buddhist sense, there's salvation in that. We are freed by that. This frees us, knowing that there is nothing to give. There is no giver and there is no receiver. That frees us up. Anyway, Okamura goes on to say, Okamura has a very interesting poem by Katagiri on page 25, which I'm not going to read. It's a complex poem, and I'm running out of time. When Okamura took over at MZMC after Katagiri's death, he said he found this poem in Japanese that Katagiri had written. And he translated it into English. It's a beautiful poem, and an entire talk could be spent on this poem. But if you have this book by Katagiri, by Shohaku Okamura, Living by Vow, it's on page 25 and 26 of the book. It's a beautiful poem. Anyway, on page he says, Katagiri's talking about judgment. We make judgments about certain things, and based on our judgments, we can get excited about certain things, or we can, as he said in his poem, we can get excited and think, oh yeah, that's right, I'm right. Or we can think the opposite, in despair. Really, is that true? So we can vacillate between despair and excitement based on our judgments, based on preferences and dislikes. And as Okamura points out, we encounter many such judgments in our lives. Sometimes people say you are good, and sometimes they say you are bad, as I just experienced. And each time we are judged, we tend toward feeling despair or excitement. We live based on opinions, not just other opinions, but also our own opinions of ourselves. He says this up and down in our attitude toward others, in our attitude toward life, in our attitude toward ourselves is samsara. This is our life as human beings. As we move in samsara, we always feel somewhat unsafe, somewhat unsettled. He says, what's wrong? What's the problem? What causes this? He says, Katagiri writes, but my heart knows somehow. I feel an irresistible desire to know. And out of this irresistible desire to know, it seems to me, comes vow. He says, we want to know the real cause of the problem. He says, this is unique to human beings. We alone ask who we are and how we should live. He says, other animals don't have this problem. And then he points out Dogen Zenji's saying, and actually Cindy Kucha talked about this. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. Okamura says, I think a human is a being who has to study the self. Other living beings don't have to do this. They have no question. We humans are troublesome creatures. We need to understand this mystery. This questioning, this need to understand is Bodhi mind, a mind that awakens to the reality of our life. And as he points out, this is what the Buddha understood and clarified, this mystery of our life that we want to know so badly, that we want to resolve. Maybe at first for the wrong reasons. So we keep practicing. We keep practicing Zazen. We keep letting go. We keep Katagiri cites a poem to Avalokiteshvara, a request of Avalokiteshvara. In not you have to say something in the other book. Yeah, Returning to Silence. He says, when you invoke the Bodhisattva of compassion, Avalokiteshvara, you say with the utmost humility, Avalokiteshvara, please help me, make me simple, make me free. This is what is being spoken of here, making me simple. Helping us understand how we contribute to human suffering by acting out of ignorance, by not acting out of the whole. He says the Buddha awakened and understood how we can live in a wholesome way with peace. And then he quotes Katagiri's phrase from this poem. One of the stages, I'll go ahead and just read this. As to this mystery of being human, clarifying, knowing how to live, how to walk with people. This knowing how to walk with people refers, he says, to interdependence. It means that we cannot live without other people or things. That to understand this, to understand that we cannot, and in fact, we do not live without other people and things, that we are totally interdependent or is, as Thich Nhat Hanh says, with other beings, is to understand how to walk with others, is to live out the vow to practice non-injury, the vow to live for the benefit of all beings. The second and the third of the three pure precepts. He says in this poem, just practice right here, right now. Sounds so simple. It is simple. We like to complicate things. This is what we're invoking. Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. Make me simple. Help me see that we can practice right here, right now, that we can wake up in each moment, that this is available to us in each moment. And he says, and we cannot help but affirm this if we take up this practice. That is vow. And a vow should not be made by our intellect or by an emotional impulse. It should come from the deepest part of us. We all know where that is. We've all experienced that. And he warns against getting too ambitious. It's interesting. He says, well, he says, each of us has different capabilities. If we cannot do very much, and we've all felt this way, we just cannot do very much, he says, then we practice just a little without any kind of self-condemnation, any kind of self-judgment. We practice just a little. He says, there is no reason for us to feel small or to say we're sorry. We just try to be right here with this body and mind and move forward just one step or even just half a step. This is a practice in a concrete sense. I'm going to end this talk really soon. I want to read one thing that I found very interesting that I don't fully understand, but I want to share it with you because I just thought it was wonderful. It's based on a quote from the Lotus Sutra. I actually wanted to talk about what I thought was from the Lotus Sutra. Norm, I couldn't find that in chapter 29 of the Lotus Sutra. 20, maybe that's why I couldn't find it. I looked in the wrong place. Anyway, a number of years ago, in 2002, the year that Paul Wellstone and his wife and his daughter and other people were killed in that plane crash. They were having a memorial service for Wellstone. And it was a Friday night, and I really, really wanted to go. And but I was the dawn. I was the Friday night dawn. I couldn't just abandon my responsibility as a dawn and go to this memorial service at the synagogue where it was being held. So, as you may or may not know, on Friday nights we recite either the Fukan Zazengi or Trusting the Heart Mind, but I didn't want to recite either one of those. So I asked Steve for a piece, and it was a piece entitled Regarder of the Cries of the World, which was a reference to Paul Wellstone himself, who famously said at one point, whatever happened to the idea that we all do better when we all do better, which I found very inclusive and an understanding of what it is to act out of wholeness. So anyway, it was this wonderful recitation entitled Regarder of the Cries of the World. And we had a card on the altar that night with Wellstone's, Paul and Sheila Wellstone's date of death on the altar. And we recited that at the end of Friday night meditation. Anyway, on page 93, he says, Okamura says, Dogen Zenji goes on to say, awakening to the true sameness is the ultimate identity of all suchnesses. There are 10 suchnesses. It's a long discussion, and I have not looked at it. Awakening to the true sameness is the ultimate identity of all suchnesses from beginning to end. Awakening to the true sameness, Okamura says, means accepting all beings as our life, accepting all beings as our life, as the Buddha's life. And then he quotes the Lotus Sutra. The suchness of the ultimate identity from beginning to end is the genuine form of all dharmas, which only a Buddha together with a Buddha can exhaustively penetrate. I found something so beautiful about that expression, which only a Buddha and a Buddha can exhaustively penetrate. I think I've heard that before, but it just really struck me. And then on page 95, he says, the phrase, only a Buddha together with a Buddha, means that no human being can penetrate this Dharma. By human beings, Dogen means individuals. So acting out of this, trying to penetrate truth just as an individual isn't going to work. But as Buddha with other Buddhas, as Buddha and Buddha working together, we can see and penetrate this Dharma, this totality, this become aware of what exactly is showing up in this moment, what exactly our life is. I just love that expression. Only a Buddha together with a Buddha. Just something not to think about too much, just kind of let it resonate. Anyway, I'm done. Any questions or comments? Yes, tell me your name again.
Yes, thank you. Just kind of a background question. So this particular formulation of the 3 pure precepts, I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit more where it comes from, because I would say if you had just quizzed me beforehand, as someone who's been kind of kicking around for a while, but not, if you had quizzed me beforehand, what are the 3 pure precepts? I would have quoted that bit from the Dhammapada. I would have said, that's what I would have thought the 3 pure precepts were.
So 183rd verse of the Dhammapada.
Yes. So I'm wondering where the formulation that you started out with, to live in enlightenment, to refrain,
practice non-injury,
save all such beings,
like live for the benefit of all beings.
Yes, like where that particular formulation comes from.
Our chant book. It comes from our chant book. That's where I know it from. Does anybody know where it came from, other than from our chant? Or is this what Katagiri? It's Mahayana. The Dhammapada, right? About which there's a lot to be said, I would imagine. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
That does answer the question. I'm wondering, I'm curious, whether I'm not curious about you can't govern Colorado on the channel, but it sounds like that would be too much to go in. Yeah, well, there's a lot of cells there. Yeah, we need to just okay. But that's the main distinction between the third. Two different ways of looking at the same thing.
Any other questions or comments? Anybody from online? Or anybody? I'm not trying to limit it. I just want to say, don't give up. Don't give up. Keep practicing. Don't give up. I guess I just get up, huh? Okay, thank you. Thank you all so much.